Hello, welcome back to the Science for Policy podcast. My name is Toby, and I'm very happy to welcome to the podcast today Maria de Graça Carvalho. Senora Carvalho is currently a member of the European Parliament, where she was recently identified by VoteWatch EU as one of the most influential MEPs in the field of innovation. But that is not her only rodeo. She has had a varied career as Minister for Science in a Portuguese government, as Principal Science Advisor to José Manuel Barroso when he was President of the European Commission. She was an architect of not just one but two European science advice mechanisms, and she has a distinguished scientific career herself as a mechanical engineer with a particular interest in energy and climate change. In other words, she's been involved in the business of science for policy in almost every possible way. Senora Carvalho, you are, as listeners might imagine, an extremely busy person, and I'm very grateful to you for taking the time to talk to me. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation for this podcast, and thank you for your kind words of introduction.
Did I get them all right?
Yes, you did. Actually, I was now not on innovation elect by the VoteWatch, but digital.
Digital. Aha.
I was in my previous mandate. I was on research and innovation. This time was on digital.
Okay. So what are you working on in the digital sphere?
I'm focused mainly on the skills, the need for more research, for more to have trained people on artificial intelligence in digital. Also looking at the fact that we don't have enough women in these areas. I've been through my life doing a lot of campaign to have more women in science and engineer, and that has been a tremendous evolution both in Europe and in Portugal, but not in digital itself. In digital, the figures shows that we are still quite behind. We have about only 20% of people working in digital are women, and this is very, very low. It's much lower than any other fields of science, of STEM, on the others, engineering. Digital is worse. Women are less represented. For example, on cyber, is around 10%, 12% that we have women. And these are areas of the future, areas where we will have better salaries, so we need to catch up and to reduce the gap between men and women in these areas. So I have been a rapporteur of several opinions and several reports in this area, also on the ethics framework for artificial intelligence and digital. So I have been quite involved on the areas of digital, and I was quite pleased and surprised that they have recognized my effort.
That's interesting. So digital is lagging behind even other traditionally problem areas, like you said, like science and maths.
Yes.
Huh. Why do you think that is?
I think that is a question of perception. It's very important, special for young girls. For example, in Portugal, we have done a big campaign for many years that we are doing this campaign since I was minister and even before with the minister Mariana Gago, to bring the attention of very young girls to science. Small kids, 5, 6, 7 years, and to have museums for young children that talks about science. And it's very important that they start liking the scientific subject and being attracted. And we have not done the same effort on digital. Young girls see the digital, for them the nerd is a young boy playing games in the digital games, and rarely is a girl. So we have a problem of perception here. They are very good users, they use, but they don't want to go deeper than that. And we have even the numbers are going down compared with the 80s all over the world. We had already in the past more women on digital than we have now. So that is the problem. We are not increasing, we are not succeeding to lower the gaps. We need to do something about it.
Yeah, okay. Well, good luck. It's clearly an important issue. So let's talk science advice, because you have a very interesting story, I think, in the European field. Before you were an MEP, you were a science advisor to President Barroso when he was president of the European Commission from 2006. What were things like in Brussels when you first arrived here? What was the state of science advice, the culture of science advice that you inherited?
There is a tradition of scientific advice in the European Commission, but at that time was done in a different way of today. It was mainly based on groups of experts. For each DG, each commissioner would have their experts to advise them. So always science, evidence, and evidence base has been a principle of the Commission, but is mainly based on committees of experts, and also the Joint Research Center has played along the last years a big role of providing reports and science advice to the different DGs and the different sectors of the Commission. President Delors has created a small unit to advise him, and this was Cellule de Prospective, that after became the BEPA. That was exactly where I was. So I was principal advisor of President Barroso, including BEPA, and there we had a group of experts that would advise directly the president.
BEPA is the Bureau of European Policy Advisors.
European Policy Advisors, yes. That has changed the names, but the function has been mainly to advise the president of the Commission. So I would say that President Barroso started feeling that the fact that we had a lot of science advice, but in a fragmented way, we would need to have something that would give more visibility and unification to the science advice. And he decided to go a step further, and on top, keeping everything that exists, but going a bit further and to create a model more Anglo-Saxonic, to have a principal chief scientific advisor. At the time, he compared the different models, and there are pros and cons in the different models. For example, there was a possibility to have not only one person, but to have a small group of chief scientific advisors, but he chose the model of one chief scientific advisor. The big advantage of having one chief scientific advisor is the visibility, especially if it's someone quite outspoken and that communicates well. There is an added value of communication and dissemination of the science advice process. So in a certain way, he decided to go that step, and was for the first time the European Commission had a chief scientific advisor, that was Anne Glover, that was backed by the BEPA itself, and also by the GRC, and also by the other committees that exist. So she could request the support of all the committees that exist and continue to exist inside the European Commission. So that was quite historic, and I think President Barroso is someone that understands very well the importance of science and the importance of having policies that are based on science that already exist in the Commission, but he wanted to give it more visibility. We want to give it more dissemination in this way that things are done in Europe. As you know, President Juncker decided not to continue with this model, and at the time he asked Commissioner Moedas to study other models that could be set up. And at the time I was senior advisor of Commissioner Moedas, and I helped him to prepare a report that we did for President Juncker, where we compare the different models that exist in the world. And it's mainly, I would say, mainly three models. One that is a chief scientific advisor, the second is a group of advisors or chief advisors, and the third, based on academies or institutions that advise the government, or some countries that have a mixture of the three or two of these models, but the category are mainly these three categories. So in certain way, we proposed also a mixed model that would combine a group of chief scientific advisors supported by a unit and together with the academies, European academies. So in certain way, a hybrid model from the ones that exist and we could see that exists in the world. And this model was quite well accepted by the outside scientific world and also by President Juncker. So there was the setup of the science advice mechanism. Mm-hmm. That is a complex system, but is probably the best system that you can, because Europe is complex, but it works well. So we have a group of chief scientific advisors, 7 chief scientific advisors, that are supported by a unit, that now this unit is in DG Research and Innovation, and that it has also scientific support of the top European academies of science, of engineer, of medicine, and that give the scientific basis also to these chief scientific advisors. So it's this mechanism that produces the opinions on the complex issues that are requested by the president, by the commissioners, or the mechanism itself can have the initiative to propose a topic and to elaborate an opinion on that topic.
Yeah, it's an interesting setup, as you say. I just want to take one step back to ask you about something you mentioned. I think it's fair to say in 2014, when President Juncker abolished the post of Chief Scientific Advisor, which was Anne Glover, as you said, there was a fair bit of controversy about that in the scientific community. And at the time, it was a lot of the debate was around whether this was a response to advice that Professor Glover had given on, particularly on GMOs at the time. Mm. And there was a lot of pushback on that from outside the Commission, from various interest groups. And so there was a view that perhaps changing the system was a response to that. Now, you were on the inside when it all happened. Is there any truth to that?
I think that new college, new president, they always want to do to revisit things and to see what are the best models. And probably President Juncker thought that to have everything concentrate in one single person would be the optimal solution. So he asked Commissioner Moedas to see other models that will be more distributed and more adequate to the European model that has different member states, different cultures. And he was happy with this solution that has, instead of one chief scientific advisor, 7, involves at least 5 European academies. So in certain way, he felt more comfortable with a model that involves more persons, more institutions. I think I remember very well the polemic that it was, but I think that is the natural way to make things different when a president starts, and to in that particular case, he felt more comfortable with something that would have more people involved than just one chief scientific advisor. Because that model has advantage and disadvantage. The advantage is, as I said, a great visibility if the person is someone that communicates well, but it can create disadvantage. So it's more difficult sometimes to get consensus if it's concentrated in one person. If you have different academies that have representatives of different member states, and of course the scientific evidence is scientific evidence, but sometimes there are uncertainties, there are different ways to look at things, and it ends up that for the European conditions and for the European complexity, this model probably works better. And it has proved so, because things that have been going well, very well, since this model is on place.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting setup as you describe it. So you've got the 7 chief advisors on the one hand instead of one, and they advise the whole college of commissioners rather than just the president. So that's also a significant change.
Yeah.
But it's also then a hybrid model, because on the other hand, as you mentioned, you've got 100 or so European academies in SAPEA. And the division of labour between those two I find very interesting. So one half collects and reviews the evidence and synthesizes it. That's the academies.
Yeah.
And then the result is handed over to the advisors, and then they're the ones who make any kind of concrete policy recommendations.
Yes.
So is that kind of firewall between the people who present the evidence and the people who make the recommendations, was that a deliberate plan from the start, like a feature, or did it come about more by serendipity?
No, that was something that took a lot of discussion until the final decision, because it was not very clear and very easy to do the distinguish between when the work of the academies would stop and would start the work of the chief scientific advisors. And I remember we were discussing, so what the opinion done by the report done by the academies, by SAPEA, can it have conclusions? Can it have options? Can it have recommendations? And there was a lot of discussions between the chief scientific advisors and the representatives of SAPEA until they arrived to this consensus. So that SAPEA does the scientific evidence and does conclusions in terms of scientific evidence. From there are the chief scientific advisors elaborate policy recommendations. So one is scientific state-of-the-art, scientific evidence, conclusions of the scientific evidence, and the others do translate that, are certain way translators of the scientific evidence already in some policy scenarios, because the final policy option is done by the college. These ones have the duty to taken the evidence by SAPEA, taken the policy recommendations or the policy scenarios done by the chief scientific advisors, and more constraints like the ethics values, like budgetary constraints. Putting all that together, they do the final decision, they do the policy. But it's an evidence-based policy based on all these elements. So that was one of the most difficult issues to discuss and to design, was exactly the frontier between SAPEA and the chief scientific advisors. But it works now, and I think that is well designed like it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, I think it's one of the great strengths of the model, and one of its most subtle features, if you like, that the people who are gathering the evidence are not the ones whose job it is to give the policy recommendations, and vice versa, that the advisors who are giving the recommendations are not also responsible for coming up with the evidence their advice is based on.
Yes.
It gives each half a bit more credibility.
Yeah.
But certainly the price you pay is a bit more complexity, because it's quite an intricate setup, and for me,
yes,
now it's my job to explain to people how it all works. Well, you've certainly bequeathed me a few headaches. And of course, as you've also mentioned, these still aren't the only elements in the EU's, the trendy phrase is the science advice ecosystem.
Yes.
Because you've also got the Joint Research Centre, the JRC, which actually predates all of this that we've been talking about. And you also have the group on ethics in science and new technologies. There's a lot going on here. Do you think this is another strength of the system?
Yes.
How does it?
The GRC.
Yes.
The GRC, I would say mainly two differences when you compare the GRC with the science advice mechanism. First, the GRC is mainly a body that works for the DGs itself, not directly to the president or to the college. Probably is not the most important topic, but it's important to say that. Second, they are part, like SAPEA, they can provide, and they do many times, provide science evidence also to feed in the 7 chief scientific advisors. They also received a lot of information from GRC, and that is important. The main difference between GRC and this mechanism is that GRC itself is not a completely independent mechanism. GRC is a DG, and there's nothing wrong to be a DG, but it's a DG. It has a whole hierarchy, Director General, directors, head of units. They are, the persons producing the reports are officials. That has the independence and the ethics of an official, and we trust them, but they are not a body independent of the Commission. And in very complex issues, this difference may be important. Yeah, this question of independence.
And how about the
ethics?
Yes.
The ethics, the objective and the mission of the ethics is completely different and complementary to the scientific ecosystem. The European Group of Ethics in the beginning was mainly devoted to biology, bioethics, but as with time has evolved and is now looking in many areas, ICT, artificial intelligence, even energy. So a lot of decisions on agriculture. So a lot of decisions have ethical implications. So they look at the ethical implications of the decisions that will be taken by the European Commission. And this is what I said is the science base, so the reports of SAPEA and chief scientific advisors, together with the reports from the European Group of Ethics, that the college makes the final decision, together with other constraints that they will have, administrative, budgetary constraints. So it's the mixture of this that an informed decision is taken by the college.
Yeah, and I can see the logic of separating the ethical elements to a different group.
Yes. And the curricula of the group of ethics is completely different from the chief scientific advisors. Of course, they are 15. They usually have 2 or 3 scientists that you can say that has a similar CV of the chief scientific advisors, but after you have people from philosophy, in ethics itself, theologists, and lawyers, and so that look to the subjects from more ethical and from the ethical point of view. So you have a lot of philosophers in that group that with the speciality of ethics.
Yeah, thanks. That's very clear. So now I want to ask a question that politicians hate to answer, but this mechanism that you helped to design has been running for what, about 7 years now?
Yes.
Yeah. So what would you do differently? What has not worked out the way you hoped?
I think doesn't have enough visibility.
Right.
And it, for example, when was only one chief scientific advisor, and Glover had more visibility than the 7. And this is always the case. When we compare the different models, we saw that countries like Australia or New Zealand, that you have a chief scientific advisor, one person, this gives more visibility to the system than when you dilute it in 5 or 7 chief scientific advisors. And it's a pity because it works very well, but the visibility is less than when you have one person.
Yeah.
I think that they need to do more work to get more visible, to disseminate more. In the beginning, they were a bit cautious. Of course, they want to play it safe, to get results, but now they have sufficient number of results and good results, well received opinions. And this is also true for SAPEA. There is not a lot of people, mainly in the for example, in the parliament that is in the Brussels Beltway, never mind the member states. The member states, I don't think that even know that the system exists. But even in Brussels, I suppose, in the parliament, not a lot of MEPs know about the system.
Well, you and I are talking. The work starts here.
Yeah, yeah, but I'm a special case probably on that.
Yeah.
But the MEPs that knew more about the system and they were big defenders on the system were the British, and they left.
Don't.
So now they have to get some key MEPs to defend the system and to speak out for the system. But I'm talking about the parliament, but it's not only the parliament, all the stakeholders, all the lobbyists, the think tanks. I don't think that the system has enough visibility. They need to work more on that part.
Yeah.
On the dissemination. Yeah.
So, since you've mentioned Parliament, and it would be remiss of me not to ask you about this too while I have you.
Yeah.
Of course, parliamentarians, like commissioners, also have to make policy decisions, which are often increasingly complex and technical, where scientific input is needed.
Yeah.
What kinds of channels are available to MEPs to get that kind of advice? And does it do the job?
We have the EPRS, the system in the parliament that produces opinions, a bit like the SAM. They don't have independent chief scientific advisors, but they have a quite good, qualified staff to produce these opinions. And they have a policy department. There they are more target on the reports that we are doing in the committees. And they developed for each, I won't say all of them, but to the main reports that we need to prepare, they elaborate reports with the science evidence that are quite useful. But there are departments inside the parliament.
And do you find that MEPs really use them? I mean, my experience of Parliament is that the main source of policy advice, science and otherwise, comes from the political side.
From the political advisors, you mean?
From the advisors, yeah, or from the groups, or from national parties?
Yes, but I think more and more people use. I'm not sure if the MEPs themselves, but the assistants, the group advisors, the secretariat of the committees, they really use these reports. I have now a report on exactly to understand and to measures to have more women in digital and AI, and the Parliament has prepared a report with outside experts with a lot of data. Has been very, very useful, and I read it very careful. Not only the report, but also the reference of the report. So I think that more and more people are using this report because subjects that arrive to us are more and more complex. It's very rare that we have a subject that doesn't require knowledge from science data, science evidence. Is very rare. So my main topics, from climate change to decisions on energy, hydrogen, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, 5G, they are all quite complex from the scientific point of view. So you need to read a lot, and you need to have a lot of advice and a lot of data, and data that you can trust to decide on these subjects.
Good. So that's one side of the question, what kind of evidence comes in. And then the other side of the question is, what kind of evidence remains when the policy is made? So I ask because I used to work for an MEP, one of the British MEPs, whose loss we were just bemoaning. And he was on the Fisheries Committee, where a lot of the work is very heavily dependent on science. And he used to say that you could watch the whole legislative process, starting with the Commission proposal and finishing with the final regulations. And it was a long process of the scientific evidence gradually being weakened and watered down. So you would start with the scientists advising the commissioners on whatever it was, maintaining healthy fish stocks, for instance. And then the Commission would say, okay, that's great, but we have to give the politicians something they can accept. So they would soften it a bit. And then it would go to Parliament and Council, and they would negotiate and compromise, and it would get softened again, not to mention conciliation and what happens there. And by the time it came out of the other end, the original science wasn't really recognisable anymore. Now, I know that's quite a cynical view. Is there any truth to it?
I think things are changing because of the same reason. Things are more and more complex, and they really need to be based on science, and the ultimate is the pandemic that we are gone through, that you really need to be guided in any decision. You need to have evidence, even evidence that that still do not exist, but you really need, now you understand that you need to be guided by science, and the scientists need to tell you what are the best solutions, even if you don't go exactly the way they are telling you, because there are constraints like economic constraints. But at least you need to know what are the consequences of your decisions. So more and more the politicians are understanding that they cannot disregard science. I suppose it's going to be more and more after this dramatic experience of the COVID-19, that we really understood that we need to take very serious all the evidence and all the scientific evidence.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. A silver lining.
Yeah.
Before we finish, I'm interested in your personal view on this. Most MEPs are generalists, of course. They don't have a scientific background, but you do. Do you feel like that gives you any kind of advantage in your work in Parliament?
I think so. Not only because you understand certain subjects better than the others. I wouldn't say that is the most the biggest advantage, because I'm researching in one subject and not in others, so that is not the main advantage. The main advantage is the scientific mind that gives you some scientific methodology of decision making, like the researchers prepare me to make decisions in research. So I applied the same methods when I was in government, when I was doing policy advisor to President Barroso or Commissioner Moedas, and in the Parliament itself. So the scientific method and the scientific way to decide, to do a literature review, to design the different options, to study the advantage and disadvantage of each of the scenarios, and to conclude. I use this methodology like I use in my research to any decision that I have to take in my professional life and even in my private life. So this is the big advantage, is the way you are used to solve problems in a scientific manner.
Yeah, well said. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. I've learned loads. I hope you found it interesting too.
Okay, thank you very much.
The Science for Policy podcast is produced by SAPEA. We're a consortium of Europe's academies and learning societies, and we're part of the European Commission's scientific advice mechanism. We provide evidence and expertise to inform the work of the group of chief scientific advisors. SAPEA is funded by the EU's Horizon 2020 programme for research and innovation, and you can find lots more information about us and our work at sapea.info. Finally, the rather lovely cello music that's playing right now is performed by Elizaveta Sushchenko, so I shall shut up and let you enjoy the last few bars. Bye for now.